Over the past several years, tactical shooters have exploded in popularity. Games like Escape from Tarkov and Squad provide hardcore, realistic situations for the gamers who are tired of dolphin diving and slide canceling. To put it simply, the tactical shooter genre has made a name for itself by being based around realism. Unfortunately though, I'd say that about 80% of these games are solely based around the multiplayer grind, meaning that if you don't play the game 24/7, or if you're like me and lack a stable internet connection, you're probably gonna have a bad time. One particular game seems to go against this mold though, Ready or Not. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, chances are that you're already really acquainted with this game, but for those of you who are unaware, Ready or Not is a SWAT simulator that takes you through a variety of different situations, ranging from active shooter encounters to Ruby Ridge-esque standoffs. It is a very dark game that touches upon topics that we seldom ever see discussed in modern media. But after your playthrough, you start to grow appreciative of what it's doing. It allows us to see the darkest corners of our society for ourselves, and it paints a picture that so many of us would rather just ignore. Now that sounds like a really great game, right? And I mean, by all accounts, it is. I'd even go as far to say that it's the best tactical police shooter on the market today. But what would you do if I told you that there was another game that went even darker than Ready or Not, and it was released 18 years prior to its creation? SWAT 4 is a tactical shooter that was developed in 2005 by Irrational Games. Created with the goal of being an authentic police simulation, SWAT 4 places the player in command of a 5-man SWAT team as they infiltrate crime scenes and arrest various suspects. Much like Ready or Not, SWAT 4 had a variety of different situations. However, most of these seem to be much more oriented towards traditional crime, rather than just random acts of violence or pedophiles. For instance, there are several cases where simple robberies or assaults rapidly escalate into hostage situations, which makes sense, right? Because people, and especially criminals, are wildly unpredictable. And when an orchestrated plan to rob a bank or something goes sideways, it's not too uncommon to see innocent people get caught in the crossfire. And I feel that that's something that SWAT 4 really captures well. There are several cases where us simply barging through the doors is enough to scare a suspect into submission, but then there are times where suspects will falsely surrender, waiting for us to drop our guard before firing their weapon. The enemies in this game feel very dynamic and lifelike. Street crooks will shoot at you wildly and demonstrate a general lack of weapon control, while more experienced criminals fire with better accuracy. In addition, enemy behavior changes based on player action. If you shoot and wound them, rather than just standing out in the open and continuing to fire at you, they'll actually try to go and seek cover and hide. One of my biggest pet peeves in modern shooters is that enemies so often act like they're suicidal. Their behavior lacks basic logic, and self-preservation seems like a foreign concept to them. However, this game, which again was made 19 years ago, seems to have perfected AI behavior. Enemies will run away and hide from you because they don't want to die. And oftentimes you'll have to be careful because some dude will have just tucked himself behind a door somewhere waiting for you to enter without checking it. For a game of this age to demonstrate this depth in its AI is incredibly impressive. And I wish more modern games would implement these systems rather than the shooting fish in a barrel approach that we've all grown accustomed to. SWAT 4's gameplay is a lot deeper than just enemy behavior though. Similar to Ready or Not, we can see a very in-depth command system where we can orchestrate our infiltrations to be as complex or as simple as our heart's desire. Aside from this though, there are some other really cool additions that I wasn't really expecting, such as the sniper cam. So one of the tools that you have when you're out on a mission is a sniper who is positioned with a view of the crime scene. If one of the suspects runs outside and is in view of this sniper, he'll radio you and let you know that he has eyes on the target. And at this point, you actually get to take control of him and shoot the suspect, which seems really simple in the grand scheme of things, but it's really cool being able to control another officer through a camera. Speaking of which, you can do that for all of the other officers there's two. You can give any operator commands simply through watching their body cam footage, meaning that if you really wanted to, you could essentially just stay in the starting area and send your team out to do all the heavy lifting like a bunch of little rats with GoPros on. However, I must admit that this tactic does have its limitations, meaning that it doesn't really work sometimes, but still, it's really cool that they added this thing in regardless. Another thing that you'll quickly notice during your SWAT playthrough is just how fragile your officer is. There were several instances in which I'd sloppily turned the corner without checking it first, only to get one shot by a dude with a shotgun. The game actually lacks healing mechanics altogether, meaning that you'll have to manage your health throughout the entire level. It helps to keep you on edge because any damage that you take, even if it doesn't kill you, drastically alters the rest of the operation. And this is by design. In an interview with GOG, Phil Harquist, the lead designer of SWAT, had the following to say: "I'm super tired of health being a nebulous thing that magically returns whenever you go and hide behind a rock for 10 seconds. Managing your health is something I miss. I think games started using that model just because it was the new standard, not necessarily because it was the right mechanic for their games." And I get what he's saying here, right? Because around this time was when we started to see shooters start to cater to more casual audiences. And generally, the easier that a game is, the more accessible it is to the consumer. I'm glad that the SWAT series decided against this, because as convenient as it may be, hold F to stop bleeding isn't really the feature I'm looking for in a realistic shooter game. My favorite part of SWAT 4 isn't the core gameplay though. While it is incredibly good, without the help of mods, it feels just a bit dated. The real reason that I and many others continue to come back to this game is the atmosphere. SWAT 4 is probably the darkest game that I've ever played. Its subject matter is grisly, and it's only amplified by the game's environment. The areas that we play in are physically dark and intimidating. Shadows are overwhelming, and without the use of a flashlight, you could easily miss a hidden suspect. SWAT sort of feels like you're in a serial killer movie. The color palette is dull and unremarkable, leaving the world with a bleakness that impacts us before we even enter a crime scene. Furthermore, a good portion of the missions take place at night, or better yet, while it's raining, further solidifying that drab atmosphere. When I first played this game, it reminded me of something really familiar, but at the time I couldn't quite place it. However, after some further research, I found that the developers of this game actually took inspiration from David Fincher, who is the man who famously directed Fight Club. And if you look at some of his movies alongside scenes of this game, you can definitely see that inspiration at work. For whatever reason, this sort of aesthetic works really well in this game to me, and personally I prefer it much more than the bright, nauseating colors that we see in some of the more modern games. If you're going to create a game that's about the darkest parts of humanity, its colors should reflect that, and SWAT 4 uses them perfectly. Additionally, there are a variety of little things in these environments that help to build the game's immersion, such as infiltration vehicles, police perimeters, and victims' bodies actually lying around the crime scenes. One of my biggest pet peeves with Ready or Not is when you load into a mass shooting level and there is nobody to be seen outside. Realistically, these events have massive perimeters that are swarmed by medics, police officers, and members of the press. So when you load into a map that's supposed to be a realistic depiction of a school shooting, it's a bit disappointing when all you see is this. And I understand that that's probably an easy thing to overlook in the development process, but the fact that a game from 2005 can capture this and a modern game can't says a lot. It's not that these subtle details change the game or anything, but they help these levels to feel more real. If it wasn't for this extreme attention to detail, I don't think SWAT would be nearly as replayable as it is. The environment of this game tells a story, and as we clear through different areas, we can begin to piece together a narrative. For instance, take a look at the diamond heist mission. When we spawn in, we can immediately see that a van has been driven through the front door. This store closes its security fence at night, and the attackers knew that the only way that they'd be able to get in was through crashing something through the front. Several of the enemies that we encounter are wearing tactical gear, but then there are others that are dressed in suits. And being that this attack occurred after hours, we can assume that these men are employees, meaning that this heist was an inside job. Based solely on the game's environment, we're able to put together a rough picture of what happened. The more heavily armed men drove in and overpowered the store's security team, while the men dressed as employees made sure that all of the vaults and safes were open at the time of the attack. And this is all confirmed in the mission briefing that we see prior to our arrival, which builds a sense of continuity and realism to this entire situation. This environmental storytelling isn't just with big picture stuff though, as there are several details that serve no purpose other than humanizing those we come across. There is one particular level that comes to mind where you're at a gas station, and in the back there's this employee break room. Now here you'll find a couch, some beer, some video games, and on the wall there's this dartboard, which doesn't seem like a lot, right? But when you look a little bit closer, all around it are the hundreds of little holes from where these guys have missed the board so many times. Whoever works here is really bad at darts, and while that has nothing to do with the story at large, little things like this help to make the characters that we encounter feel more real. In this game, you truly feel like you're traveling through another person's space, and that's something that I've really grown to appreciate. SWAT 4's environments also manage to capture a sort of corruption that falls in line with the game's theme. For instance, in rundown areas you'll see cockroaches and other bugs skitter across the floor. Injured civilians will roll around in pain and beg you not to leave them, but you're forced to anyway. And the placement of bodies and other props in the levels really builds a sense of unease and discomfort. Pair this with the haunting atmosphere that we mentioned earlier, and suddenly you've got a shooter that is bordering on horror. Audio design also plays a large role in this, as the subtle use of music and sound effects help to further immerse the player in SWAT 4's darkness. We can hear the distant screams from wounded victims, and the commotion and gunfire that's present within active shooting scenarios. This audio by itself is unsettling, but when you pair it together with the visuals and environment that we mentioned earlier, you create something that's genuinely terrifying. There's actually a particular level that is beloved by the community for this exact reason, titled the Fairfax Residence. On October 23rd, we receive a call for a high-risk warrant service on Lawrence, Fairfax. Over the past year and a half, there has been a string of grisly unsolved homicides, with all of the victims being women who were attending the local university. DNA testing on the most previous victim revealed that Fairfax is the one who is responsible for these killings, so it's our job to go in and arrest him before he can strike again. We initially spawn outside facing a jack-o'-lantern, and we can watch as the leaves in front of us slowly start to fall. The sky above us is a deep hue of red, and the smoke from the neighbor's chimney blows up and towards the moon. Weirdly enough, this scene almost feels sort of cozy. The crickets are chirping, the wind is blowing, and nothing seems to be too out of the ordinary. So naturally, we make our way up onto the porch and into the house. Whatever sort of comfort that we had earlier is gone now. The music and sound effects hit us immediately as we cross into the threshold of the home. Just the noise alone is able to convey to us that this is a place of misery. It's able to frighten us before we even see anything. This is only built upon when we make our way out past the living room, where we can overhear an interview with one of the victims' mothers on the nearby radio.
I would just like to say, Melinda, if you can hear me, honey, I love you very much. And I'd like to say to whoever took her, I beg you, please, please bring my daughter back. Please. Please.
That was the mother of Melinda Klein, an apparent victim of the so-called law school lyncher.
Now, truth be told, I'm pretty desensitized to stuff like this. Like, I usually wouldn't flinch to something as simple as this, right? But for whatever reason, this particular encounter really managed to creep me out. I don't know if it was the voice acting or the music or just the context of the situation, but this short interview managed to make my skin crawl. And when you make your way downstairs and into the basement, this crescendo continues. The killer has collected newspaper clippings as trophies. He's made plaster molds of the faces of his victims. Further down, we'll find an old rusted door, and when we open it, the crescendo finally reaches its climax.
Continuing on. Orders. It's clear. Area clear.
Entry team to talk. We found Melinda Klein. She's gonna be okay.
Roger on the good news, entry team. We'll notify her family.
This level sounds like a horror movie. From the slow dread building in the background to the sharp stab of the strings as the killer is finally revealed. Everything that occurs at the Fairfax Residence is foreshadowed by the audio design, which is incredible. And this is, if I'm not mistaken, the second level of the game. And through just the music and the atmosphere, it's able to set the tone for the rest of SWAT 4. Now, from what I've told you so far, SWAT 4 probably sounds pretty intense, right? But we've only really taken a look at the game's features. We haven't even touched on its subject matter yet. Aside from the previously mentioned serial killer and heist, SWAT 4 also delves into drug trafficking, active shooters, terrorist organizations, doomsday cults, and a whole slew of other things that I really don't have time for right now. But anyways, the mission briefings for these manage to set a perfect picture for our experience. When we view the briefing, we're able to listen to our captain give details about the current situation, as well as listen to some 911 calls sent in by bystanders. Now, this is pretty typical for this genre, but the real reason that I bring this up is that the voice acting is stellar. Callers will speak naturally, and it feels like we're listening to an actual conversation rather than just lines being read out by a voice actor.
911 emergency 107, hello?
Gunmen just invaded my company. I'm not making this up, you gotta believe me.
Where are you, sir?
I'm at work. The Wainwright Office Center, Suite 130. I'm under my desk. You gotta do something, damn it!
We have officers in the area responding now, sir. Can you tell me how many attackers there are?
I don't know, at least 3. There may be 4. Look, I'm not going out there and counting them.
Can you give me a description? What are they armed with?
What? They look like some kind of goddamn terrorists. How should I know what they're armed with? Oh shit.
Hello? Sir, are you there?
The fact that you can hear the annoyance and fear and panic all rolled up into this guy's voice is fucking great, and it helps to set the tone before we even head out towards the crime scene. Aside from the voice acting, the missions themselves are quite grim too. Take for instance the Children of Terone. One night we receive an anonymous tip that a cult living out of an apartment complex intends to commit mass suicide. They've purchased enormous amounts of fertilizer and other suspicious supplies, and in the words of our commander, it seems that the Teronians intend to blow themselves sky high and take a piece of the neighborhood with them. Now, just a quick sidebar here, but the name Teronian to me seems to be a nod to the Branch Davidians, a real-life religious cult infamous for their role in the 1993 Waco siege. The Branch Davidians were a more extreme offshoot of another religion, and the Teronians here are very similar, as they're said to be an offshoot of a separatist group from somewhere up in Idaho somewhere. Anyways though, with this basic information out of the way, we can begin our investigation. When we make our way into the building, we can immediately see that it is in heavy disrepair. Dirt and grime covers the floor, and trash bags and other refuse is littered all throughout the first hallway. On a nearby wall, we can see a strange symbol, as well as a short writing from one of the cultists. Let them echo his name in every corner of the heavens. We will wait as his children in the darkness, choking soil and filth until he raises us up to breathe. In a nearby room, we'll see I Am Transformed painted on the wall, and below it sits a book and a box of pipe bombs. The book is titled The Ward in Coming Times and showcases the same symbol that we saw etched on the wall earlier. So naturally with this, we can assume that this is some sort of religious text. And with the sheer amount of them that we find lying around, I don't think it's too out of line to say that this text is essentially the Teronians' Bible. Past this room is a small kitchen with some posters, some more pipe bombs, and a box of tasty flavored fruit drink, which, given the context of this situation, seems to be a bit of a tongue-in-cheek reference to the Jonestown Massacre. The more we begin to search around, the more concerning this scene will become. We find enormous amounts of bomb-making supplies, as well as explosive devices booby-trapping the doors, meaning that if we trigger just one of these, it's likely to detonate the entire building, so we need to tread carefully. Further along, we'll find another small room, which appears to be a nursery, although right now there is a distinct lack of children. The walls are adorned in finger paintings and drawings, as well as the word farewell 8 times over. For now though, we'll simply brush this off and continue our way upstairs. And here we bump into Andrew Terone, the leader of the cult. Terone is naturally carrying a rifle, and he assaults us as soon as we walk in, so we don't really have too much of a choice when it comes to combat. After we neutralize him though, we begin to search around the room that he was in, where we'll uncover something truly sinister. A marked map of the city. It would appear that the cult's initial plan wasn't just to blow themselves up, but was to detonate several large explosives at different areas around the city, which would undoubtedly kill and injure hundreds. Luckily though, we were here to put a stop to it before it could become a reality. So at this point, we've taken out the cult's leader, we've foiled their terrorist plot, and we've searched the majority of the complex. The only thing that we have left is a simple formality. We need to clear the basement. But when we make our way down there, we're met with something that we couldn't have possibly prepared ourselves for. Multiple child-sized graves sit in a row, dug beneath the cold concrete of the basement. The headstones read things like, "Farewell, my beloved son," and "There shall be hands to greet you." Each grave marker is stamped with the logo of the church, once for every child in the grave. That's why there were no children in the nursery. That's why there were 8 empty beds, and that's why we saw the word farewell written over and over and over. Next to these, we can see an unfinished grave, inside of which sits a duffel bag and the book that we saw earlier. The parents of these children were so convinced on their plan of self-annihilation that they offered their children up first. They truly believed that a pleasant afterlife awaited them after all of this. What else could all of this pain and misery have been for? Why else did they move to this shitty apartment building in the city, if not to prepare them for something greater? Their leader was their new messiah, so why would he ever lie to them? This had to be done because this was the way. This was the only way. They had no other choice. These people have been brainwashed to the point where they would murder their own kids, which at first might seem a little extreme to just go and throw in a game, but once you consider real-world events, suddenly this isn't such a crazy depiction. One final farewell looms above their buried bodies, and with that, the mission comes to an end. SWAT 4 is not just a tactical shooter. It is something much more than that. It explores the darkest aspects of human nature and confronts us with uncomfortable realities that many of us would just prefer to ignore. This is one of the few games that I have where I've continued to think about it long after I've played it. And I think a big part of that is that it's 19 years old, yet it still manages to outperform modern titles. There's so many simple things in its story and presentation that make it so good, and these same things are completely ignored by modern games, and I really don't have any idea why. It sort of reminds me of Fallout New Vegas, right? In that it's definitely not the most polished gameplay by today's standards, but it's so well crafted that it manages to compete with any modern title that comes out, and I respect the fuck out of that. I'm telling you. If Ready or Not could adopt some of the things that made SWAT 4 so great, they'd probably have the greatest SWAT game of all time. But for now, that title belongs to someone else. If any of you guys are interested in buying SWAT 4, you can find it on GOG.com. This is not sponsored in any way. It just took me forever to find the game, and I finally found it there, so be sure check that out if you're interested in it. Also, if you do get the game, be sure to get the Elite Force mod, because you practically need that for the game to be able to run on modern hardware. So if you're going to get the game, definitely check that out. I'll leave a link to everything down below. And finally, a huge special thanks to all of my patrons and YouTube members who have continued to support me. Your guys' contributions definitely don't go unnoticed, and I just want each of you to know that from the bottom of my heart, I am extremely grateful for you. With all of that being said though, I'm so glad that you decided to tune in and watch today's video. You know I love you. I'm out.